Hello everyone, I'd like to welcome you to today's webinar, SmartLists for Data Analysis. We appreciate you taking the time out of your schedule to join us. There are a couple of housekeeping items we'd like to mention before we begin. All attendees are in listen-only mode. If you have any questions throughout the presentation, please either raise your hand and we'll unmute your individual line or submit them through the GoToWebinar question box. We do have a lot of material to cover today, so the presentation will go the full hour, but we'll be saving time at the end to address questions, and we'll be able to stay on extra in case it does go over the 2 o'clock time. I'd like to introduce today's speaker. We have Dan Specht, who is a client care consultant here at Socius. As a client care consultant, Dan is responsible for supporting Socius's GP clients. Dan has supported most areas of GPs specializing in analytical, accounting, and financial modules. Additionally, Dan has a variety of SQL skills to diagnose and correct issues within the Dynamics GP. So Dan, at this point, we're ready to transition over to you to get the presentation started.
Great, well, thank you very much. All right, I'll go ahead and hop over to Dynamics GP for us. So we're going to be talking in Dynamics GP 2015, our latest version. Now, how many times do you go into a smart list and you think, I'd really like to see some additional data there? For example, here I'm going to go into our purchasing smart lists. We can expand out the folder and I see there's a nice vendor smart list. And when I click on it, it gives me a really nice list of my vendors. You know, I'd really like to see the email address for each vendor on the smart list. So initially, I could go into my columns and see if that's an available field. And click Add and scroll through the default columns that are there. I don't see anything under email. I can even switch to all columns, which are ones that are joined to the view at all. And I'm still not seeing anything specific to email. I could try searching it. And I don't see anything coming in. So then I realized that this smart list isn't there for me. Fortunately, there are a few different solutions to bring in these additional fields or even create new smart lists. The first one we're going to be talking about is Smart List Designer. Now, Smart List Designer is a new feature that came out in the Source Pack 2 of GP 2013, and it's on all versions after that. When we look at our list here, Smart List, we can see that there's a new button here called New. When I click New, it opens up our Smart List Designer window, and it pre-populates with the fields that we already see in our current smart list that was highlighted. This one gives me nice functionality to be able to add additional fields, bring in different tables or views, and see the information that I'd like to see. Well, you know, I'd like to pull in some email information, but I'm looking at this mass amount of tables, and I really don't know where to begin. So what I can do is use some tools to try to figure out which column and which table I'd want to use to pull in that email information. So I'm going to go back to Dynamics GP here, and I'm going to go to my cards and the vendor card, because I know the email address is stored within the address. I'm going to open up the Internet Information window where the email address is stored, and I see it has my email address in there. Now, if I want to try to figure out what table this would be held in, there's a couple tools I can use. We're going to discuss the thing called Table Finder a little later when we get into Smart List Builder, but right now we're going to discuss about the tools that are built in within Dynamics GP without Smart List Builder being there. If I go to our tools and integrate and table import, it's going to give me a list of all the different tables that make up the information in this window. We can see anything from the PM master address. We can see the vendor master, other information that could possibly be populating in this window. Now, I'm not certain, based on the names, which one it is. Could it be the card email address? Could it be the internet addresses table? So I want to dig in a little further and try to see what table holds that field that I want. So I'm going to go to another field now called Resource Descriptions. So I'm going to go to my Tools, Resource Descriptions in Windows. Now I know that the email addresses are stored for both customers and vendors, so the table is going to be under Company. And I can sort it either by the form name or the series name there. So not only with the windows, we can also look at the tables themselves. So I'm going to pull up our table list, and I'll do a lookup, and I'll set it to company here. And as I look through, I'm going to be looking for those tables that were in our list. So internet addresses. Fortunately, it's alphabetical because I have it set to by display name. So I'm going to go down to our internet information, internet addresses table. Now when I double click here, it's going to show me a list of all the different fields that are in that table. As I scroll through, I can look and see that, oh indeed, the email to address and the CC and BCC are all in this table, so that's most likely the table I want. So I kind of make note of that, write it down, take a screenshot. So those are the tables I like. That's the internet addresses table. So I can go ahead and close out of here, and I'll go back to my smart list. So now I can know it's a Dynamics GP table, and we can expand them out here. I remember it was under the company series. Now it's going through SQL, and it's generating a big list of all the different company tables that are in GP. And again, alphabetical order. So I just need to remember my alphabet here, and I can come down to internet addresses and see all the different fields. Now if I clicked here, it would automatically add all of the different addresses that are in this list, or all the different fields that are in this list. But we only want the 3 email addresses. So I'm going to just check the boxes next to those. And now on the bottom, I see that I have those 3 fields added to my existing smart list. Let's go ahead and give this a name here. I'm going to be creative and call it vendor with email address. And we'll leave it under the purchasing series because it'll be related to that. We now need to tell the system, though, how do we relate this internet addresses table to the vendor smart list that we're modifying? So we'll start with our first table, and that's the list of vendors. And we know the unique identity of each one is going to be that vendor ID. We have a few options for joining. We have a left join, which means everything on the left side will appear, and then anything on the right will only appear if it matches. We have an inner join, which means only the records that are in both tables will appear, or a cross join, which shows every single record matched up with every other record. Now in here, we can look at the different fields, and by looking at this, we can tell us the master ID. So the vendor ID will link then to the master ID. There also is the ability to do a auto link. When we click that, it comes in here and it tries to find the relationship. It doesn't always, though, because it's a master ID. It usually works best when both fields have the same field name, such as a vendor ID in both. So I'll manually go ahead and create this. I'm going to start out with a left join because I still want to see all my vendors even if they don't have an email address set. All right, so now that I have this, I'm kind of curious what this is going to look like. So one of the things I can do right away is go ahead and, instead of having to click OK and run the smart list, I can click Execute Query, and that's going to show down here the information that I've added. So now I can see those additional columns. Now, if I'm kind of curious, though, what would the different join look like? So, I see there's quite a few records in here. It's pretty long. Maybe I only want to see records that have an email address. So let's take a look. If I switch to an inner join, what would that look like? So instead of having to exit the program or this window and run the smart list, I can click the execute query again. Now I see I only get a few records returned. And when I scroll over, each record has an email address set. So that gives me the ability to kind of preview ahead of time what is going to be shown in the smart list. Now if I want to get more advanced too, I can look at the SQL behind this smart list now. So if I look through, I can see we have select against the master table. I'm joined in the SY01200, which is the internet information, shows me how they're joined and what records will be appeared there, how it's formatting the phone numbers, etc. I could copy and paste this out of here, and I could make my own SQL view if I wanted, using that information later on. So another thing that's kind of nice is the go-to. Now you might, if you used SmartLists before, you might know you can often double-click on a smart list and it opens up another window. Well, that's called the go-to. And when you create a new smart list based upon an existing one, the go-tos actually flow through. And you can see that they're existing go-tos where we have the ability to use a go-to that opens up the vendor inquiry window, the address master, summary information. So those are all go-tos that are built in by default. Now, they're still working on adding additional functionality for making new go-tos. Out of the box right now, you can only create a new go-to in SmartList Designer that would open another SmartList, a navigation list, or a web page. At this point, they don't have the ability to open up another window. But unfortunately, these flow through, so we know that they exist and can be used. Now, as I look at this, I might say, the information that I want is here, but then there's some additional information I'd like to add, but it isn't necessarily a field in one of these tables. Well, we do have this button over here that allows us to create calculator fields. If we go ahead and click on Add, we can see, we can give it a name, and we can have it end up as a type of integer, string, date. Here's our list of database fields from the field we added. We can see the different functions that are available. We have math functions, text type functions if you want to trim it so it's not so long. If you want to add information, you can stuff it in the middle of a text field. You do a case statement, let's say where the email address is null, you want it to say not available or it doesn't exist. You can make a date difference where you want to see maybe the difference between a due date and a posting date, things like that. So there's a lot of functionality there where you can create your own expressions to be used. And of course, you can add the constant if you wanted to have it, a constant variable or a constant text in there. So we'll go ahead and create some additional calculator fields on later SmartList. But this functionality is definitely here, and it can be helpful, and it would just appear as another line right on the bottom. All right. So with this SmartList now, we're going to go ahead and click OK, and we'll take a look at it right within SmartList itself. We see there's a new folder under Purchasing now. And as this generates, we can go across and see the email address fields now added. So let's say the SmartList that we want to create is pretty advanced, that we want to do some formatting outside of GP. We want it to maybe look a different direction that we can't get just from the basic GP tables. Well, we can also do our work in SQL and then use that SQL view to show to make it show the SmartList. So here's a view that I've written in the past that kind of pivots the information so it shows the summary sales per customer per month, both for this year and the past year. If I run it as a simple select statement in SQL, we can see that it shows the customer, how many sales they had in January, February, March, etc. You can see we had a couple slow periods there. It must be a seasonal business, and last year, January, February, March, etc. Well, I really would like this information in a SmartList, and due to some of the functionality within the SQL view here of a pivot and other functionality, I can't really do that just by joining tables within SmartList Designer. So I'm going to create it out in SQL, and then I'm going to create a SQL view for it. So I'm going to create my SQL view called associates customer sales, and here. Then I want to be sure that I give the users rights to select against it. Of course, the SA user would always have admin rights to run a select statement against the new view, but I want to be sure that all the users do. So I'm going to go ahead and grant select permissions on my view and do it to the dying group. Now the dying group is a SQL group that all GP users are part of and GP objects. And we basically just need the permissions to select against the new view that we made. So now that that view is created in GP or in SQL and permissions are given to it, I'm going to go ahead and go back to our SmartList Designer here, and I'm going to create a new one. So we don't want to base this upon any existing one, so I can just go to the top. I don't have any particular SmartList highlighted, and I'll click New. So I'll go ahead and give it a very creative name again. We'll say something like I like to put an A there, so it'll be at the top of my list here when I try to find it. But we'll say, A customer summary sales. And I want this to be in the series of sales since it's about customers. But now when I scroll down, we know it's not a GP table. You know it's not any of these module tables, analytical accounting, the other modules that are added. But if we go to the very bottom, we see views, and those are going to be views that are either in the system database or the company. I'll go ahead and expand out the company database, and it's going to go through SQL and create a list of all the different views that are in that company. Now, out of the box, there are quite a few views in GP, and by default, almost all the major smart lists have a view in there. So that's another way that you could kind of build upon an existing smart list. So you'll see a smart list view or a SQL view. Let's call it payables transactions, receivings transactions, etc. And those are a great foundation then to build upon when you're making your smart lists. As you look at this list too, you can see that it has all the different modules that can be added to GP and that actually are installed in your GP instance available for tables. So if you wanted to pull in some analytical accounting data to an existing maybe GL smart list, if you wanted to pull in another project information, you'd be able to do that. So you see our list here. I'm going to scroll down to actually scroll up here because I remember I put an A in front of it. A, associates, customer sales. So I want all the different columns that I have in here, so I'm going to just check at the top level. And now we see all my fields appear from my view. I don't need to have any kind of relationship set because there's only one view here. Of course, if I wanted to maybe pull in some additional customer information, I could pull that customer table in and have a customer name and maybe some more detail on it. Now, you notice maybe something a little different in Smart List in that these three dots appear in front of the different amount fields. When I click on this, it gives me the ability to say, do I want a symbol? So I'll say, yes, I want the US dollar symbol. And how many decimal places do we want it to be hard-coded to? I could go through each one of these and set that up, but I'm actually going to show you a different way to manipulate how the data looks when it comes out. So I'm only going to do it for the first column. So again, I want to preview this data, so I'm going to click on Execute there. And we can see that first column has a nice dollar sign, has a nice 2 decimals there, where the other ones still show all the different decimal places and they don't have the dollar sign. So that's just kind of to show you one way that you can manipulate that so it looks like it's in a nice currency format. So I'm going to go ahead and click OK, and we'll see what the smart list looks like inside of GP. Now, when I run this, this is great, but maybe I want to see some totals. What was my total for all January or February or March? GP does, within SmartLists itself, give you some nice functionality around the export feature. So I'm going to go ahead and, you could click Word. One like this might not look as nice in Word, where if it was 2 columns, just text might be a nicer Word type one. But I'm going to go ahead and export this to Excel. Now looking in here, boy, that first column looks pretty good that I manipulated within the SmartList itself, but the other ones aren't looking too well. I could go into Excel and change them, but just don't really want to have to go through and make all these changes to the formats and manipulate the data that way. So what I'm going to do is create what's called an export solution. So you can do this with any SmartList, either a new one that you create or an existing SmartList in GP. The first step is to, within the SmartList, within the Excel document you have open, define what you want each column to be. So this first column, I'm going to say I want it to be a type of text. And then the rest of these columns, I'm going to say I want them to be a currency. So highlight them all, format cells, I'm going to go to currency, 2 decimal places. I'll even have the dollar sign symbol come in there. Leave the negatives as a minus sign, and I'll click OK. So now that these columns are all formatted how I want them to be, what I can do is I'll highlight it, clear the data, And this now is going to be my export solution template. So I'm going to go to File, and I'm going to save this on my desktop. And I'll call it my summary sales. Stay consistent, put a summary sales export solution. So that's going to be my template that I'll use here in a minute. And we'll close that out. So to go ahead and set that to be my export solution, I'm going to go to my SmartLists menu and go to Export Solutions. I'll give it a name. I'll call it for a summary sales. My document, I'm going to path out to the one I just saved on my desktop. If I wanted to have a macro set up before or after, if I needed to manipulate something else, I could do that. Application is going to be Excel, and you want this just to be available for yourself or for everyone, that export solution. So I'm going to go to see my A customer summary sales and check that to say I want this SmartList solution to be available for this SmartList. So I'll click Save, and we see that cool old-fashioned Excel icon there, maybe the 97 or something there, and we'll close out of here. So we know that now exists. So to refresh the window, I'm going to close out of SmartList and come back in. And I'm going to expand out sales again, and I see my A customer sales summary list there. That's generating. But we see something new now under Excel. We see a down arrow. So when I click that now, it doesn't automatically go to Excel, but I have some options. I can do it like I did before, just a quick export, or I can use that summary sales export solution. So when I select that A summary sales export solution, and it pops out to Excel here, we can see now it comes out in the format that I set it up as. They're coming out now with the 2 decimal places and the dollar signs. This is nice as well. You know, there are times when you maybe export a voucher number and it drops the leading zeros if it exports as a number instead of a text field. So this allows you to kind of define what you want each one to be. All right, so we'll close out of here. Now, a couple other things you can do with the SmartList. We have a nice search functionality. So let's say we only wanted to see certain customers, or we only wanted to see the results where, you know, let's say current year April is greater than, well, we can say not equal to, there's a lot of options here, but we'll say it's greater than 1. I don't actually think we're going to get any results here since it all set to 0. So let's do January current. We'll see that it filters out some of the 0 ones here. So let's say it's greater than 0. So it allows us to weed out some of the data that we might not want to see. We only see where there actually was data in the January current. And again, we could export this to Excel. We could do a summing in Excel. We could group in Excel, pivot tables, whatever you want to do in Excel then for that as well. So the search functionality, so, you know, let's say I really like this SmartList. I want to keep it and run it often. So I can go ahead and click on favorites. I can create a favorite. I can call it, this is where my great creativity comes in play again. I'll call it January greater than 0. And I can add a favorite either for my, just a favorite, or I can have a favorite and a reminder. So on your home page, it'll be a reminder to say, you know, run the SmartList, and you can define how often you want it to remind you. So if I add my favorite now, I can see there's now this additional favorite there that always has these settings. I can come in here, I can modify it. I can change who it's visible to if you just wanted to be visible to your own user versus the system. Click modify, or I can remove it altogether. Of course, there's printing options. You know, I would recommend typically to maybe go to Excel first before you print, so you have more control over how it prints. But you can print right from here as well. And of course, the favorites pane. This just talks about where we can hide and show it, increase the width, decrease the width. You can get a lot of the same functionality by right-clicking to increase, decrease. You know, push this button to hide it there. So some great functionality there. So any user that's set to be, you know, either the SA user or a power user is going to have automatic rights to see these new custom SmartLists. But users that aren't one of those two we'll need security added to them to be able to see the smart list that we just made, which is good. That way, if it's private data, not everyone's going to automatically have the access to see it. So I'm going to go into our administration tab, and I'm going to go ahead and pull in the user security. So I'll start at the security task level. It's kind of where it all begins. I could either pull in an existing task, something like one of the report sales tasks, because we know if they already can print the reports, maybe they should be able to do the smart list as well. Or we could create a specific new smart list task that would be unique to all the custom smart lists. I've seen it done different ways. So I'm going to go ahead and create one here. We'll call it a smart list designer task, and view custom smart lists. And just put it under the category of company since it's kind of system-wide there. I'm going to change the product to smart list since that's what we're referring to. It is a separate module here in GP World. Then we'll go down to the smart list objects and the smart list objects. Now we can see a huge list of all the different smart lists out there. Now by default, a lot of the default ones are taken care of through the tasks that are already within GP that are created. But for the new ones, they're not automatically added. So I'll go ahead and select this one and go down to our vendor with the email address as well. So we can see those two now will be added to this smart list designer task. I can go ahead and add that task to a role, and I can add that role then either to an existing one, like a bookkeeper, or I could create a new role as well. And when that new role is created, of course, then you can go to the user security and assign that to whichever users need that. So, but is one important feature though, just to remember once you create it, hey, some people can't see it. We need to be sure we add it to a task and a role that users have access to. So that's kind of the nuts and bolts of Smart List Designer. You can tell it's got a lot of nice functionality. But I'm going to next talk about Smart List Builder. And Smart List Builder has been around since version 8 of Dynamics GP. It was originally developed by E1. It was sold by Microsoft for many years. And then it was recently in 2014 returned back to E1 since Microsoft no longer does the OEM. I have temporarily turned off Smart List Builder, so I can show Smart List Designer, but I'm going to go ahead and enable it again. So I'll highlight Smart List Builder, enable it, and now we'll see things a little different when we click the new or the modify button. So I'll go ahead and go into our Smart List again here. There's two ways to get into the Smart List Builder. We go to our Tools, Smart List Builder, and we can go over some of these other options a little later. Or we can also go right from the Smart List again and click Modify or New. So when I come to Smart List Builder, you see there's a couple of options. I can make a new one, or I can modify an existing. When I go to existing, I can see this large list of all the default Smart Lists that are in GP here. So let's say I wanted to do that vendor email one that I talked about before. I could pull in the existing vendor one. I could go ahead and join in that additional table, just like before, and create that Smart List. Well, for this example, though, what is nice though too is that when I would save this, it's actually going to not create a new one like we did before. Remember, we created a new one that's called vendors with email addresses. This actually modifies the existing one. So if you wanted to change something like make all the returns show as negative, or add a field to a Smart List that you always want to be there, you're actually modifying the default Smart List themselves, not creating a new one when you go to existing. So that gives a nice functionality there to make permanent changes without clogging up with tons of new Smart Lists. For this example, again, though, I'm going to go ahead and create a Smart List that shows all these payables transactions. I don't really like the existing payables transaction one, so I want to make my own. Well, again, though, I don't necessarily know what tables I want to see for these payables transactions. So Smart List Builder has a nice tool called Table Finder. So again, I'm going to go to the window that I know I entered transactions in, because I think that might be a good place to start to figure out what tables hold the information. So I'll go to my Purchasing, Transactions, and Transaction Entry. Now here, we can see it's our typical transaction information here. So now when I go to Tools, though, instead of having to go to Integrate, Table Import, I'm going to go down to a field called Table Finder. This opens up a nice window for us that helps us determine what we need to find. So not only does it kind of go to the form level, but then it also breaks down to the field level. So right now, these are all the different tables that populate this form, and it's kind of overwhelming, but I specifically am thinking, well, what holds the voucher number? Because that's probably going to hold the data that I want to see. So in our field list, I can see all the different fields, vendor IDs, vendor names. I want to take a look at the voucher number work. Now searching through, finding all the different tables that hold that voucher number work, and then it's going to populate it for us here. We can see it switch to that name here. There are currently 3 records in that table, and the table's name is the payables transaction work. We can see a list of the different fields here. We can see what the primary keys are for that field. What's really nice too is we can see what the SQL statement would be to view that data. So we can see it's the PM 10,000 table. That might help us creating a view later or something if we wanted to. If I wanted to see what's currently in that table, I can click this button here and preview it. And we can currently see there are 3 saved transactions in that table. So it's a great way to kind of preview, to think of it as the table that you want to use for your smart list. All right, so on the bottom here now, if I knew I wanted this as the basis for my smart list, I can click the Create Smart List button. That's going to bring me right to that Smart List Builder window and have this table pre-populated, ready for me to use. I can do the same with Excel reports or navigation lists, which we're not covering in this session. All right, well, I kind of know that it's PM transaction. I know I kind of want that. Open in history, but this gives me a good start to know it's the PM transaction. That's how it's going to look in my list of tables. So I'll go ahead and close this and close out of here. And I'm going to go back to my Smart List Builder report. I'm going to give it a name called a PM transaction. And I'll give it a creative name, a payables transactions. The series folder I wanted to appear under is the purchasing, so I'll go ahead and pull that in. And what you'll notice it's kind of different now is when I click the plus to decide what I want in, I not only see those Dynamics GP tables, which we saw in the Smart List Designer, but I also see a list of existing Smart Lists, SQL table, or that SQL view like we did with Smart List Designer. But even a newer thing is called the SQL script, where if I had a SQL script that I wrote, like we saw in that window, I could use this, and they would use that then to create a smart list. But we looked in that table finder. We know that it's a GB table that we want to bring in, the payables transactions. So under series purchasing, I go to tables, and I remember from my good note taking here that it's a payables transaction table. So payables transaction, I know it was a work that I was looking at, but I really just want open in history. So I'm going to click on open. It defaults the keys and the key fields in there for me, and I'm going to click save. Now, what's really nice is that you can decide which columns you want to not only default on the report when you first run it, but which ones do you want to be even available for users to pull in at a later time. So anything in this first column of display is going to display as a column that you could add if they click columns and wanted to add one. The default are the ones that are actually going to appear on the smart list at when the first time you generate it. I don't necessarily want these all available, but I think I'm going to pull in the vendor ID, document type, name, number, amount, current transaction amount, and maybe someone might want to see the batch number. So I'm going to go ahead and select that in the discount amount. Out of the box, though, I really am just curious about the document type, vendor, date, number, amount, and current transaction amount. So you can see there's a couple other ones that someone might want to pull in at a later time, but I'm not going to default on there. So I'll go ahead and save this here and go to our smart list. It's detected a change there since we made a new one. We'll let it go through it and add that. So we'll go to purchasing to see payables transactions. So I'm looking at this, and boy, I don't really like how this shows 1 and 5 and 6, and that doesn't really help me that much. And kind of noticing from the record count, don't see any history here. I only see my 215 open, so I know there's some more work that needs to be done. So I'm going to click on Modify again, and it's going to pull us this time right to that SmartList Builder window. So the first thing first here, I don't really like how that document type is appearing as numbers. So what I can do is highlight this. You can see there's a blue expansion arrow, so I'll click that. Now the code already recognizes that this is a number list, so we can actually define what we want each number to be. So one, I can say it's going to be invoice. And if you don't know what this means, there's a nice SDK that you can download that kind of describes what each field means, and also in the resource description it often finds that. Finance charge. I never claimed to be a good speller though, so we can say, I know there's not any 3, so let's just go right to 4, which we know is a return. 5 is a credit memo. And 6 we know is a payment. So we can copy that into a new one as well, but we'll go ahead and save. Now, let's say I want to view this data, but I don't want to generate it again. Another option is, similarly to the SmartList Designer, is we can preview the data right from here. So you can see that it pulls it in right how it's going to view it from SQL. But now that we have this document type set up in here, we want to run it as a SmartList and see if that takes effect. Now instead of seeing 1, we see invoice. Instead of seeing 5, we see credit memo. Instead of 6, we see payment. So now it makes a little more sense than as we scroll through. So we'll go ahead and modify this again here. And like I said, I only see 215 records. I really would like to see some history in there as well, not just the open table. So I'm going to go to the properties of this table. Clicking that little pencil type thing, because we use a lot of pencils when we're in GP. And we're going to go ahead and click on Match Tables. This Match Table is a great feature that allows us to pull in tables that are the same and basically do a SQL union all for them. So I'm going to call this All PM Transactions, and I'm going to pull in that tables paid transaction file here, so we can know it's a PM paid transactions history file. So I'm going to save that. Now GP is going through and matching all the columns from the 2 tables, so it makes it into one union. So we can see, the original table is not open, how it's matching it to the history table. Let's say I didn't like how that's matched, I can update it to match properly. If there's some that weren't matched, we could scroll through and we see a blank line there. Again, I'll just give it a description of all PM transactions. Suppose it's just open history, but for the sake we'll say all, and we'll save it. The keys stay the same. Now we can see it's actually a different icon there of 2 tables going into 1. That way we know it's the matched tables. So when I save this and let it generate, we can see we get a lot more than the 215, and we see all the different records both in history and open. So another nice thing with the SmartList, we saw that within SmartList Designer, you were kind of limited with the number of go-tos and type of go-tos that you could do. Well, SmartList Builder has a lot of deeper functionality within the go-tos. So I'm going to go ahead and go to our go-tos here. I'm going to add a new one. You could bring in one of the SmartList, open a form, open a file, a website. You can execute a procedure. I'll do quite a bit of functionality in here. So we're going to open up a form. And I'm really curious about more information about the vendor that's doing the transaction. So I want to be able to drill down to the vendor master maintenance window. So I'll call it vendor maintenance. It's a Dynamics GP product here. So we'll find our Microsoft Dynamics GP. Series is purchasing. And the form is the vendor maintenance window. Again, we have a nice alphabetical. If you don't know what the name is, you can always go to the window itself and the name's up on top. Now we know when we open that window up, we would typically have to type in the vendor name and then click tab to have it populate. So we know we need to run a script and populate the field. So I'm going to click on add. And we're going to leave it to set a field value and then run a field script. The field that we want to populate is the vendor ID. So when we look in that vendor maintenance window, we see the vendor ID is blank. We want it to populate. And we want it to populate from our match table, and we want it to populate with the vendor ID. and save, and then I'm going to go ahead and have it run a script at the end as well. So once it populates it, then it'll run a script. That just means, in essence, kind of like the tab. It's going to tab off it and populate the window. So I'll click Save, set that to be the default go-to. And now when I click Save here and I run the SmartList, if I see data that I like, I can double-click it and it's going to open up right to that vendor. So I can see, okay, so I can see a little more information. I can see the comment fields. I can see the vendor account. There's some additional thing that I wanted to view on that vendor maintenance window. You can do the same thing for the actual inquiry window itself if you want to view the transaction, maybe see what's applied to it, things like that. So there's a lot of leeway there you can do with the go-tos. Another nice feature in SmartList Builder that's maybe a little different than SmartList Designer is that you can adjust the columns. In SmartList Designer, the columns come in as you check the box. So let's say you wanted the vendor ID on top, you'd have to be sure you checked the vendor ID box first so it came up to the top row. Here, we can move things to the top, move them down, move them around so that you can have them in the order that makes sense for you. Restrictions, let's say you only want me to see vendors from a certain class. You can have a hard-coded restriction right here in this report. You come in here and add one for any field. There's quite a few selections. It does not contain, between two variables equals one of a list. So you could have let's say you only want to see invoices and credits, but not payments. You can make a list then of just say, show me payments, show me credits, and not other types. So it's a lot of built-in restrictions that you can do right at this level. Well, let's go ahead and make a calculated field. The calculated fields are a little bit easier in SmartList Builder because it tells you what you need when you're using different variables. So I'm going to go ahead and click Add here. And I'm going to give this a name here. I really want to see the amount that's been paid. I mean, I can see the document amount, I can see the current transaction amount, but I actually want, without having to do those calculations in my head or do them in Excel, I want to see a column that shows the amount that's been paid. So I basically want to take the document amount and subtract the current transaction amount. I'm just going to give it a name, amount paid here. And the field type is going to be a currency. Now, I'll show you a couple different things here before we actually set this one up here. But here you can see we have some company information you could pull in. If you wanted to pull that into the SmartList, you can create a calculate field that shows it. All the different fields from our matched table are in here. Then we also have a bunch of different functions. So the string functions, let's say I wanted to do a system function where it's a case, where it says, when this, then this. If I wanted to set up a restriction that says, when it's return type, set it to be negative, something like that. When I click this, it shows me exactly what I need to populate. I need to add the input expression, the when expression, results expression, then an else. So it kind of lays it out for you where in SmartList Designer you need to know all those different areas and need to know that you need to add a case and the when and the then. But this lays it out for you pretty nice. Now for mine, I'm just going to use some simple arithmetic here. So I'm going to go to our fields, and I'm going to take the document amount. Not the discount, but the document here. As soon as I have the ability to read properly here. So I take the document amount. I can either just push the minus key on the keyboard, or I can go up to the arithmetic operators, subtract, and then we'll pull in current transaction amount. I can validate it to see if it's valid. It's a valid calculated field. So I'll go ahead and save it. Now this will be a field that I can bring into the report here. When I click OK, I come down here and I can default that in there. So now when I click save here and we take a look at it, we see the additional column now of the amount paid where it subtracts these two for us, and we can see how much has been paid for that invoice. So another thing that is kind of nice within this blue expansion arrows is that if it's an amount here, we can drill in, we can decide if we want to show the currency symbols, percentage symbols. 1,000th, let's say it's an account index value. If I'm pulling in the GL master table, it's going to have the account index, not the account. Well, if I know that it's the account index, I can mark this and it'll actually show the account number for us. So I don't need to join in the GL 105 to get the account nums. I can have it showed right here. Same thing with a note. If it's a note index field, we can click there and it's going to pull in that note from the notes table. You can default the number of decimal places and you can define if certain fields should be displayed as negative. And that's all under these different types here. You can expand and you'll see what options are available. If you want to format the string, it could be like a number, other mask, or social security number, you can do that as well. So let's talk a little bit about some of these options here. We can duplicate it. If I wanted to display the SQL for it, you can go here and it pulls out that SQL script of the data that I'm pulling in. If I wanted to show how the calculated fields, maybe the restrictions are all looking within SQL, I can really get as much detail as I want here. And I can copy this out, I can review it. It's not showing the data that I want properly. Maybe I can look at it in SQL and see how it's generating. So that gives some additional functionality for you there. The next thing you could do is, we talked about briefly, is previewing the data. It's going to show us how it looks right out of the box SQL. It's not going to have that formatting that we did, but it's a good way to kind of preview and see the record count and things like that. The next one is kind of a neat thing. It's actually create a view. So let's say I really like how this is. I joined a bunch of tables together, and it's something I might want to use on a more regular basis, even outside of GP. I can create a SQL view. I can create it for one company, all companies. These are going to be the types like that, so you can actually create different SQL views right from that. The other thing we talked about, you can either click the blue expansion arrow, or you can pull in these different here and define how you want these fields to appear. So if you want a date field to appear a certain way, you can do that. If you want a string field to appear a certain way, you can do that. Or you can just highlight and click the blue expansion arrow. All right. So the one last option that I think is kind of neat, and that's summary. And this is definitely a thing that the SmartLists designer doesn't have. Let's say I really want to see the total amount of the documents and the amounts paid per vendor, as opposed to seeing each one individually. I can mark SmartList summary. It's going to go ahead and default kind of how it thinks it should be a count or sum or what it should be. But it's definitely changeable. So I'm going to say vendor ID is what I want to group it by. So that means it's going to show each vendor. I'll have a group by that. And then we can come through here and we want to see the batch number. It could be a count, and that's not even a field. They default on there, so that's fine. We want to see the sum of the currency amounts, the document amount, current transaction amount, discount amount. Document number, we'll just do a count again so we can see the total number of documents that have been done for that total for these vendors. And the calculated field as well is going to be a summary. So when I turn that on, I can click Save, and I can click Save again here, and it's going to look quite a bit different for us. So we can see here, we could probably remove some of these columns we don't want. We can rename them as well. But we have our vendor ID. We can see a total of all their documents, and the 19 documents that have been done, the total current amount that we owe them, and the total amount paid them. And that's where we could even do a date range, within the restrictions, so you can see for a certain date range your totals and view your summary information like that. Well, I'm going to go ahead and turn that off here so we can kind of go back to our base SmartList. And when we're in the summary view, I'll kind of mention to you here that you can do multi-company. If you wanted to pull in, all the data for different companies, you can mark different companies and pull them in as well. So you can see your Fabricam, your Z Fabricam, whatever companies you have, you can see them all in one SmartList. As opposed to when whatever company you're in, when you run it, then that's when it's going to appear, that company's data. All right, so a couple other pieces of information here that we can go to. So we went ahead and created this, but let's say we wanted to use a SQL view, similarly to what we did for that summary sales one. So we'll go ahead and save this and put this aside here. There is some nice additional security within SmartList Builder to prevent users from seeing maybe some SQL views you don't want them to, or accessing the areas of the SQL that they shouldn't. So when we go to our Dynamics GP menu, and we go to our Tools, SmartList Builder, you see there's a security section here. If you wanted to have a direct data connection security, it's more for the Excel reports, you can go in there. Table security, if there's certain GB tables you didn't want them to have access to. I'm going to show you the SQL table security. Here we can see for each database now a full list of the tables that are in that database and a full list of the views that are in that database. So my 2015 is my 201 company. And we can see a list of the views here. So by default, users could not use that A Associates Customer Sales SmartList that I created. I would need to come in here and say, yes, this view can be used with a SmartList. So I mark that, then it will appear as an option. So if I click OK, I come in here, I want to do a new SmartList here. Now we'll do our customer sales. And I want to pull a SQL table this time. I'm going to populate the name here first, so I'll go ahead and do that. And we'll choose the sales series again here. So when I click adding a SQL Server table, we can see now that any of the that view does show up. Originally, if we hadn't added that security to it, the view wouldn't be here to select. Now, if I select that, I wanted to find the key fields in case I want to use a go-to, and for that, we'll say it's the customer is really the key field. If I don't mark Use Company Database, regardless of what company I'm in, it's going to run it for the 201 database. If I mark Use Company Database, it's going to run it for whatever database for the company that I'm in. So if I'm in my other company, it's going to run the results for that company. If I'm in Fabricam, it's going to run the results from my Fabricam company. So that's an important thing to note. If sometimes I've seen people where they don't mark it, and the results are the same in all the companies, they don't know why. So that's added. Again, we can choose which ones we want to default and not appear there. You know, we can preview our SQL data. And here's where we can either use an export solution or we can come into each of these, click the expansion, and we can decide that we want, you know, to appear the currency symbol, the thousand separator, etc. So it gives us a nice built-in functionality there. So I'll go ahead and save that. Now, whenever we make a change like that, we can go back into SmartList and they'll say, we detected a change. Do you want to make these changes? So we say yes, and we'll see the additional SmartList created. And it populates then, you know, because all the fields were formatted as a currency with the 2 decimals, then it shows them in that way. And I can see the sales for last January, this January, push them to Excel if I want, etc. We can see though that there's not any kind of export solution because the export solution was specific to this favorite here. Now we see the export solution, so they are specific and they're not going to be universal. You need to create one for each record. So going back to the SmartList window options here, SmartList Builder options here, I'll just show you a couple other things here that are nice. You can import them and export them. So let's say you're working with another company or your partner has one that they really like, you can import it and export it and you know, give it to different GP instances. Some maintenance things you don't necessarily need to worry about unless support asks you to, but you can refresh the list. If something doesn't look right, you can look what's in the process queue. You can refresh the cache. So if maybe a SmartList isn't showing up like it should, talked about security, and we just have the about information then for the SmartList Builder. Well, you know, we've kind of gone over, you know, some of the great functionality that's offered both by the SmartList Designer and the SmartList Builder, and really they're there to enhance your reporting capabilities. You know, they allow you to push the data to Excel, which you can do a lot of work in, to summarize data right within the reports, you know, customize how you want it to look so it meets your needs. And you can definitely feel free to reach out to your account manager, associates, if you want more information about any of these, or you can reach out to you know, your main consultant as well. And yeah, definitely let us know if you have any questions on that process.
Thanks, Dan.
So we'll turn it back over for you here.
Sure. And it does look like we have some questions in the pipeline, but to remind everyone, you can either raise your hand and we'll unmute your line so that you can ask Dan the question directly, or type it into the question box and I can field those questions to him. There are a couple of things we wanted to mention on the slide you're seeing now. Our next monthly GP user webinar is going to be on March 17th, covering the professional services tool library. We're also excited to announce that our annual GP and CRM customer event will be hosted in 3 locations this year: Columbus on May 5th, Charlotte on May 10th, and Atlanta on May 12th. These are a great opportunity for you and your team to get in front of what's new with your product, tips and tricks, how to use it, meet associates and Microsoft executives. So please take a look at socius1.com/aspire is where we have all the information on sessions and how to register for those events. Also, a couple of promotions: 5% off Scribe Insight license or a 3-year online subscription through March 31st, and 15% discount we just announced today when you commit to a trial or a purchase of any Rockton software product by May 31st. And then, Dan, if you want to move to the next slide, this is Dan's direct contact information. So if you do think of any questions that we're not able to address today, you can reach out to him directly. His phone and his email are there on the screen. And we did record today's presentation, and we'll be sending it out later today. So there have been a few questions about if they could get notes or copy of today's presentation. So we will be sending that out as well as hosting that on our site. Dan, there's a question here: is multiple facility an option in SmartList?
You know, there are, by default, I know multi-binary stream does provide some custom smart lists that will pull that facility in. So their custom code will overlay on it, and it'll allow it to have those facilities. But definitely, even outside of the box, you could join in those tables. You just need to know, which BS table, binary stream 90403, etc., would have the customer information or have the transaction for the facility, and you could easily join those in using the same steps that we had shown. But out of the box, the binary stream should have some that have the facility information.
Okay. We do have 3 more minutes, so Dan and I are going to stay on the line for any more questions. But if you do need to leave today, we appreciate your time and thanks for joining us. And we'll hang out for a couple more minutes to see if there's any more questions.